call Grant Robertson.
Very much, Mr. Chair, and I think my colleague, Dr. David Clark, has covered very well the broad outline of our concerns on this bill, but I want to make reference to the Minister's contribution that he made a few moments ago, because two things struck me about it. It was his first contribution as the Minister of Revenue, and in it he managed to do two things. The first of those was to contradict the Prime Minister, which is not a good thing, I'd suggest, to do in his very first speech as Minister of Revenue, and I'll explain that in a moment. But the other thing he did was the classic National Party approach. So the Labor Party comes forward with a policy proposal to offer 3 years free post-high school training and education, a contribution, Mr. Chair, an investment in the future of New Zealand. Donald Trump Jr. over there doesn't like it, but actually it's an investment in the future of New Zealanders. It's an investment in making sure we have people who are work ready, who are able to deal with the changes that are coming in the workforce, who will be the high-skilled workers who employers implore us day after day to say the thing we can't find in New Zealand are the skilled workers who will drive productivity and innovation. Our policy is an investment in that. It's an investment. He called it a bribe. He called it a bribe. Well, there's the great irony, because the bribe is being funded from the same funding that the Prime Minister says is going to be used for tax cuts. That's the bribe. That's the bribe, because that's not the investment in the future of New Zealand, in the long-term contribution that the next generation of New Zealanders can make if they get that chance at education and training. Absolutely. Once again, from the National Party, it'll be the tax cuts that benefit the wealthy. It'll be the tax cuts that go to their mates, rather than an investment that all New Zealanders can be a part of. So my challenge to the members opposite is get up and defend tax cuts versus an investment in our future. We are more than happy on this side of the House to have the debate with you and with New Zealand about which is the best approach. Should we invest in the future of New Zealanders, or should we fritter it away in tax cuts for the National Party's mates? I welcome that debate, Mr. Chair. The Chair is urging me to come back to the bill, and in doing so...
Would be good. Yeah.
Well, I was only responding to the Minister in his contribution. But part one, clause one of this bill asks us to talk about the title, and as my colleague David Clark has said, there are many alternative titles. I want to make reference to a couple of points here. The first of those is two words don't appear in the title, which actually, in all honesty, they should. And that is to do with child support changes, because that is a big part of what this bill is actually about. And as my colleague David Clark mentioned, this is not Michael Woodhouse's fault, so he gets off the hook on this one. But the process of making changes to the child support system has been a bit of a shambles under a couple of ministers, and the most recent of them, Todd McClay, did his best, I suspect, to try and undo some of the damage. But to recap, Mr. Chair, the situation that we came into when this bill was introduced to the House was that we discovered that the cost of implementing the IT system for child support changes had blown out from an initial $30 million, fairly substantial sum, to $163 million. What we actually discovered, Mr. Chair, when we got into the committee stages of this bill and the Inland Revenue Department Commissioner came in, was more than that. The full rollout of the child support IT system was going to be worth $225 million, and they just decided not to do phase 2 of it at the moment. There were strong recommendations from the Treasury, from the State Services Commission, from the Government's Chief Information Officer to wait until the vast project changing the IT system at the IRD overall could be done, and these child support system changes could be incorporated into that. The government rejected that advice. The government decided to press on, and as a result, we now see a potential bill of up around $163 million for the system. That is the equivalent of a quarter of the annual child support payments that IRD collects. That is a huge amount of money, and not a cent of it is going to be going into those kids themselves and their well-being. So, Mr Chair, those words child support should be in here. The government should be prepared to acknowledge the fact that they actually got this wrong, that they are having to undo a stuff up here, Mr Chair.
Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. That they are undoing a stuff up, and they should acknowledge that in the bill. The annual rates element of the bill is here, and that is in the title, and that is as it should be. Our support for this legislation does not indicate our support for those particular rates, and I do challenge the government to actually stand up and say whether they believe the tax system at the moment in New Zealand is balanced, is it fair? Are people paying their fair share to ensure that all New Zealanders get a fair go? And the answer to that question is no. And this bill should have in its title the idea that there are missed opportunities, because time after time this government brings tax legislation to this House that, yes, deals with some of the minor changes, the remedial changes, the inefficiencies. Fantastic, great. But where's the vision? Where's the vision for a tax system that actually sets New Zealand up for the future, that gives everybody a fair go, that recognises that those who have the most can pay a little more to ensure that all New Zealanders get the chances and the opportunities that they deserve? That's what's missing from this legislation, Mr Chair, and unfortunately is missing time and time again from other tax legislation. The other matter mentioned in the title, Mr Chair, is research and development, and my colleague Stuart Nash covered this pretty well in his contribution, but I want to make one point, and it actually arises from a visit I made with Mr Nash in the Hawke's Bay to Lowe Corporation. And Andy Lowe was a very busy man. He was with us that day, and just as he stood up and he walked out the door, this is last year, he swung around back to us and he said, R&D tax credits, you've got to do them. That was what he said. Now, what Andy Lowe was saying by that was the grant-based system that is now operated under Stephen Joyce, also known as the picking winners system operating under Stephen Joyce, is not enough when it comes to research and development in New Zealand. What businesses are telling us when they say to the Labor Party, we support your R&D tax credit policy, is that it provides certainty, is that it provides an assurity for them that they can invest in research and development. They don't have to be at the whim of Stephen Joyce. And when Chris Bishop was there, I'm sure he had his list of winners when he was Stephen Joyce's advisor that he picked out, and he said, these are the ones we'll pick this time. These are the people who get the R&D support. We don't think that's good enough on this side of the House. What we think is necessary is that there is a broad base to research and development, that actually all companies in New Zealand know that that's where they can invest, and that's where they know they've got the support of the government. So the changes in here in the bill, Mr Chair, are tinkering. They're not actually dealing with the fundamental issue of how we lift research and development to drive a productive economy. Again, a missed opportunity in this bill, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, I just in the brief time remaining want to refer to the other matters in clauses 1 and 2, and that is around the commencement dates, because one could make a very, and this, any of my colleagues who want to pick this up, one could make a very lengthy contribution looking at the commencement dates, plural, that appear in clause 2, because they range all over the place. And I mentioned in an earlier call, one of them actually goes back to 2008-9, but actually in clause 2.5, we discover that section 253 comes into force on the 10th of October 2000, 16 years back. I wonder if members opposite would like to help explain to us quite how that's occurred. Various other commencement dates appear in here. We do understand on this side of the House that when you're amending different acts of Parliament, that will happen. But to have a clause that goes all the way back to 2000, I think probably Chris Bishop was running around in short pants in the Hutt Valley in the 2000, listening to sort of Blind Spot or something like that, and probably still even then would have lost to Trevor Mallard in a bike race. Probably still even then would have lost to Trevor Mallard in a bike race. Oh, there we go. So Chris Bishop would have been there in 2000, and perhaps he could explain to us quite how we have a clause in the commencement that dates back to 2000. So, Mr Chair, the Labor Party will be supporting this bill, but we are extremely disappointed that once again a taxation bill has come here that fails to reflect what New Zealanders want. A fair tax system where people pay their fair share so everybody gets a fair go. Unsurprising, really, the National Party doesn't believe in that.